Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Honored to have Hollis join me. A quick story about Hollis that I wasn't going to tell. But, you know, I live in Boulder, and Hollis lives in Boulder also. And we have a game that we play in Boulder. It's, are they a homeless person or a venture capitalist? And so when I met Hollis, I swore he was a homeless person. Turns out he's more of the latter. But no, thanks for inviting me, man. This is an amazing group. I'm probably one of the elder statesmen of this event, I guess. I'm 53. Anybody beat that? Oh, wow. Oh, amazing. Yeah. Well, I've been to a lot of these events. I'm sure you guys have too. And this crowd is amazing. Like the culture and the vibe. These are my peeps. So I'm going to be preaching to the choir for a lot of this. But I have a ton of stuff to cover. And I think it's limited to an hour. So I'm going to move very, very fast and hopefully leave some time for questions. But first, a disclaimer. So I mentioned, I'm in my 50s now. And my only claim here is I've run really hard for a really long time. I've done a ton of cool stuff in my professional life and in my personal life. I've learned a lot of lessons, and I've made every single mistake you can make. And that's really the purpose of this talk is I want to share the hard lessons I've learned, and I've learned from a bunch of others along the way, so that you younger folks at least don't have to make the same mistakes, so that you can get to a kick-ass life much faster. All right, so I want to start with a personal story. So in September of 2017, I lived in Dallas, Texas, and I was out for a late evening run, and I get a call from the CEO of my company. At the time, I was the CMO of this big multi-billion-dollar company, and we were in the midst of selling the company. And so my CEO goes, hey, be at DFW Private Terminal tomorrow morning. We have a meeting with Masa tomorrow. And the Masa he was referring to is Masa's son, who is the legendary multi-billionaire CEO of SoftBank. It's like a big Japanese conglomerate. Masa had just launched this private equity fund called the Vision Fund. And the Vision Fund is the largest private equity fund that's ever existed, $100 billion, like huge stakes. And so I was like, I'll be there. And so after a pretty bad night of sleep, I got up early, went to DFW Private Terminal. And I'm not trying to flex here, but I've flown private a bunch for business because when you work in a big company, you do that. This time, though, I got kind of a surprise because it turns out my CEO and the rest of the team were in New York. They were flying to San Francisco on a different plane. So I have this 12-seat private jet to myself, and you can see the big dumb grin on my face. The stewardess took that picture. I only talk about that because it was like one of those moments where it's like, wow, you've come a long way from bagging groceries at $3.50 an hour in a small town in Texas. That's where I started. But the day got even crazier because it turns out we were having the meeting at Masa's house. And Masa had just bought this house, and it's the highest price ever paid for a house in the United States, $150 million. So when I say it was over the top, you have no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, we get to the front door, and they made us take off our shoes, and they asked us what our shoe size was. I said 13. They bring us Burberry slippers to put on while we're in the house. We walk in, there's like priceless art everywhere. I mean, it was like crazy town, servants running everywhere. So we get into the Masa's dining room. It's like a 30-seat dining table, and Masa himself is seated there, and all of his lieutenants. It's like a who's who of Wall Street. It's like the big leagues. And so we start the meeting, and I'm not going to get into the details of the meeting, but about halfway through, I kind of had an epiphany. I'm like looking around the room, and the feeling I had wasn't that, wow, look how cool this is. It was like, I just don't want to be here. I looked around the table, and the people I saw, most of them looked unhealthy, didn't look anything like this crowd. And most of them didn't seem particularly happy. They were kind of dickheads for the most part. And so the urge I had was actually just to run. Here I was at maybe the pinnacle of my career, and I just wanted to run. And it reminded me of a quote I had seen from a kind of an idol of mine named Yvon Chouinard. Have you heard of Patagonia, the clothing wear brand? He founded Patagonia. He wrote an incredible book called Let My People Surf. Anyway, he said, when you reach the summit, you realize there's nothing there. That's kind of how I felt. Like I was like 40-something. I'd spent my entire life like climbing the ladder, working to get to this point, and I got there, and it wasn't what I wanted. And so I actually did something that not many people, I don't think, do. I hit the reset button. Within weeks of that meeting, I quit my job with no plan. I moved my family from godforsaken Dallas, Texas, no offense to Dallas residents, to Boulder, Colorado, and I'll talk more about why Boulder in a little bit. And I started to get, when I did that, I started to get messages from a bunch of my friends, and most of the messages were something like this. They were like, dude, have you lost your mind? I mean, to the outside world, I had checked every box that defined success. I'd put my head down and I'd grind for decades to reach it. You know, I had the big house in a fancy neighborhood, had a prestigious job, 7-figure income, like all the things, like all the perks that you can get. And yet it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't my definition of success. And I actually, though, even though I felt like I had to do it, that the others being concerned for me, thinking I was crazy, I was like, well, it's possible they're right. So I would literally wake up in the middle of the night in a panic thinking like, what the hell have I done? Like, I just blew up the perfect life. Like, what are my friends going to think? What is my status going to be in society? Is this going to hurt my marriage? What about my kids? I mean, we're all familiar with these swirling thoughts you have when you make big, bold moves. But I also started to get messages from a different type of person. So some of the people who are my friends, who are the most successful people by society's definition, they had something different to say. So these are actual friends of mine. So one of my friends is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He reached out to me and he said, hey man, good for you. You know, like, I've got this big job, I've got tons of money, and frankly, I'm miserable. And I have another friend, one of my best friends was an NFL player for 10 years, had a ton of success in the NFL, retired at 33. It sounds like the dream. And he always talks and complains about how bored he is. He doesn't know how to use his time. He has nothing to do. Then recently, like in the past year, one of my friends, he started a company in the dental space, and his company got bought for $1.2 billion cash. He was a co-founder. You can imagine, you know, that kind of life-changing outcome. And yet, every time I talk to him, he's just miserable because he doesn't have a family, he doesn't have a partner, and he would trade all of that money to have a family, like someone to share it all with. So I've observed this, but then I also ran across this quote from Jim Collins. You guys know who Jim Collins is? He's like probably the most famous business author in the world. He wrote Good to Great, a bunch of other books. And I read this quote and it just stopped me in my tracks. He said, most of the best business leaders I've observed don't have great lives. I mean, that should be a huge red flag to anybody in business, that Jim Collins, he's talked to more business leaders than anybody in the world, probably by a wide margin. And he's saying that most of the top business leaders he's met don't have great lives. So it really begs a question, which is, what are you doing to be the exception? That was the question I was trying to answer. Because if you do believe that most of these extremely successful people aren't happy, and I assume everybody here wants a great career but also wants a great life, then you have to do something to be the exception. And so before we go on, we all have to take the red pill, because I'm going to expose some hard truths today. If you remember from the Matrix, the blue pill, you can take it and live in blissful ignorance for the rest of your life. Or you can take the red pill and know the painful truth. And the painful truth is that everything society tells us about success is wrong. We were talking about this last night. And I don't mean like a little bit wrong, I mean 180 degrees wrong. So the very first step, if you want to build a great life, in my opinion, is you have to be willing to go against the grain of society. You have to be the guy in this picture saying, yes, you are all wrong. It's hard to do. And it all comes down to, it's really captured, I think, by this quote. Annie Dillard is a great American author and poet. She has some banger just quotes, but this one is one of my favorites. She says, everyone has great days. It's great lives that are hard to come by. And if you think about it, it's very deep, because society tells us that a great life is just like a string of great days, right? Like it's an epic night out with the boys or girls. It's an incredible vacation. It's closing a big business deal. It's like a hot date, whatever. And if you live enough of those great lives and post them to Instagram, or those great days, then you'll have a great life. And that's just actually not how it works at all. It turns out that the stuff a great life is made from is very different, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So my hope today, I'm going to share 10 ideas of a bunch that I've written about over the past 5 years. But my hope is that one of these ideas will just like inspire you to think a little bit differently, or maybe even make a change in your life. And I've got to move very fast because I have a lot of stuff in here. Let's go. So number one is define the dream. And I would bet everybody in this room, like in your mind, you have a picture of what success looks like. But I would also bet almost none of you have actually written down in detail what your definition of success is. And so I developed an exercise a few years ago for my own good that I call the ideal end state. And it's not a sexy name. If anybody has a better name for this exercise, please let me. Everybody always tells me that's a terrible name for this exercise. But it's a super, what is it?
Best case scenario.
That's a good, see, problem solved. All right, you want to come up here? Okay. But it's a really simple exercise. So all you do is get out a piece of paper or your iPhone Notes app, which is what I use, and literally bullet out what would your ideal life look like. If there was no constraints, what would your ideal life look like? And I want to point out, this is not a bucket list. This isn't a list of accomplishments. This is a state of being. Like, how are you going to spend your time? Who are you going to be around? This is mine, so I'm going to read you a few of them because I know it's small up here. But like mine says, freedom to live and work anywhere, control 80% of my schedule, challenging, interesting work done on my terms. Notice I'm not saying anything about retiring. Like, I want to work forever, but I want to do it on my terms. I think that's how a lot of people are these days. Lots of sunshine and time outside, mornings free to read and write, climb several times a week and train towards 514. Only climbers would understand that. I'm a rock climber. That's a big part of my life. Be top 0.1% fit for my age group. Positive vibes only, thriving marriage, and on and on. You can see that most of these are checked off because I am 53 and I've worked on this for a long time. There's a few still remaining. And that's the point. It's like, dream big here. Like, what would your ideal life really look like? If you're 30 and you're already living your ideal life, you've either crushed it or you're not thinking big enough, right? So I've gone through this exercise over the years with dozens of people, one-on-one, everybody from like college students to literal like billionaire business tycoons. And in every case, it's like super eye-opening. And there's two things that typically come out of it. Number one is it identifies the gaps in your life. So I call a gap is the difference between what you say you want, right, which is like on that list, and then what you're doing. In every single case, there's like, including mine, even today, there's always gaps. And the goal, of course, is either you got the list wrong or you need to close those gaps. And a simple example for me of a gap would be, and this is personal, is nowhere on my list does it say drive a fancy car. I have no problem with people who drive fancy cars, but it's just transportation to me. I drive very little. And so if I was driving a fancy car today, that would be a gap. And it would not only be not contributing toward my ideal life, it could be taking away from it. Because like, let's say I have a big car payment. Now it's keeping me from controlling my time. And so you see how these gaps, such a powerful exercise. But what's also powerful, maybe more powerful, is when people finish their list, they look back at it, and almost every case they go, oh my God, almost nothing on my list costs a bunch of money. Like all the things that actually bring me true joy, a lot of them are actually free. And so they realize they don't need extreme riches. What they need is control of their time. And of course, control of your time does require money, but in most cases, it's nowhere near as much as you might think. And so that's a good segue into my next point, which is know your number. So I'm guessing everybody in here has an FU number in their mind, right? Like maybe it's $1 million, $5 million, 10 million, 50 million, whatever it is. Everybody kind of has this vague number in mind. And actually, this is something that Harvard recently studied. So Harvard Business School recently asked 1,000, who has seen this study? Okay, don't kill my punchline. But Harvard Business School asked 1,000 people with a net worth between $1 million and $100 million, how much money would you need to be happy? And what shocked the researchers is the answer was the same across the board, across the entire world. What do you think the answer was?
Double what I have now.
Exactly, twice what I have. So do you see what's happening here?
Wow.
You know, I call it the hamster wheel, where you're just running faster and faster and faster. That's the story of me. I was running really fast, had this incredible income. I was rich, but I felt poor. It's rampant. So luckily, and you'll see that like a lot of these ideas I'm talking about are very much related. So years ago, I was climbing this rock formation, which is called the Third Flatiron. It's above Boulder, Colorado. I ran into a guy named John. This guy was much younger than me, but he shared a simple idea that really changed the way I think about money. I'm assuming a lot of you here have heard of like the 4% rule or FIRE. Okay, maybe a few of you. Well, good. I'm glad most of you haven't. This is I'm a finance guy. Like that's what I did for my career, and I'd never heard of this, but it's such a simple framework for understanding what your number is and then what trade-offs you can make to get your number down so that you can be financially independent sooner. Without getting too geeky about it, it basically says like you can safely withdraw 4% of your net worth or your assets every year and never run out of money. It's been back tested in the stock market forever. The flip side of that, which I like to think about, is it means to achieve financial independence, you need assets or net worth that's 25 times what your annual spending is. So let's look at a simple example. Let's say that your annual living expenses are $240,000, and that's $20,000 a month. Maybe some of you spend more than that, I don't know, but you can live a pretty good life on $20,000. Let's just use it as an example. So 25 times that $240,000 is $6 million, which for a lot of people, that's a daunting number. Like, gosh, I'll get to 6 million when I'm like 84 or something. So what's beautiful about this formula, the 4% rule, is it allows you to look at trade-offs that you could make to get that number down. And the biggest leverage point that you have is cutting your expenses. It turns out it's way easier to trim expenses than it is to earn an extra $1 million and put it in the bank. And so as a simple example, if you cut your monthly expenses from 20K to 15K, recognizing that you just did your ideal life scenario, and you saw that actually a lot of the things that really bring you joy don't require tons of money, that takes the number from 6 million to 4.5 million. So the way the math works is for every $1,000 you cut from your monthly expenses, you get 300 times that in reduction in your number. But wait, there's more. Most people who achieve financial independence, including myself, we don't stop working completely. That's a path to misery, in my opinion. So most people will continue to do like side hustles or like a part-time job, or like in my case, I do like occasional consulting. If I tried to earn a living off of these speaking gigs, I'd be living a very simple life. So let's say that your family agrees to continue earning like $5,000 a month. You're both baristas or something part-time. Again, that same math applies, and now the number goes down to $3 million. But wait, there's more. Some of you, like some of the guys I rode from the airport with yesterday, were talking about they have some real estate investments, and I have some too that provide passive income. Or maybe you're like super lucky and you have like a trust fund that pays you passive income or whatever. If you have passive income, it works the same way. So that, again, now we're down to 2.1 million. So we're still talking millions of dollars, but doesn't that feel way more achievable to a young person than $6 million? And the beauty of this is it's customize it for yourself. Like whatever trade-offs you want to make, whatever earning potential you have, customize it for yourself. And I'll wrap this section up by saying there's a great quote from a famous rock climber named Jimmy Chen. Some of you maybe have heard of him. And he said, at either end of the financial spectrum, there lies a leisure class. So the powerful takeaway from this is if you're mega rich, yes, you can do whatever you want with your time. That's an easy one. But also, like, if you choose to live a super simple life, it's actually pretty easy to be financially independent and be a leisure class. It's the messy middle where most people live that's hard, where you're like, you can get there, but it's going to take you till 65 or 70. And so this sort of simple math around the 4% rule is a way to kind of break that cycle. This is a picture of me and my really good friend, Thomas. Thomas is, I think he's 38 years old. He's an ex-military guy. Now he's a mountain guide. He has never in his life made more than $60,000 a year, but he lives such a simple life. He's single. He lives on about $30,000 a year. He's already achieved financial independence. He works 4 to 6 months a year, travels the world the rest of the year. And I used to look at Thomas and I'd be like, how in the hell do you have a better life than me? Like, I did all the right things and I made all this money. And it's a choice he made. He focused on it, got to his number, and now he lives the life he wants. If you want to go deeper on this, the guy who popularized this idea is a guy named Mr. Money Mustache. It's a funny name. Go to his website. I actually his name's Pete. I interviewed him on my podcast. So if you go to compoundingpod.com, you can watch that interview. All right, next item, upgrade from first class to economy. And this is not a typo. What I'm talking about here is minimalism, and it goes hand in hand with everything we've been talking about. So if you've watched the movie Fight Club, you remember the main character, Tyler Durden, has this great line. He says, the things you own end up owning you. And it really is true. I mean, we all feel that, like, everything that we own owns a little piece of us. And I've got a funny story. So I've written about a lot of this stuff on Twitter, and this is probably like my most viral story ever because it's kind of funny and embarrassing. But, you know, as a kid growing up in a small town in Texas, like, I thought the Porsche 911 was like the pinnacle of success. I worshiped that car. I'd get like these Motor Trend, if you remember that magazine. I'd rip pictures out and put it on my wall. It was like the definition of success to me. Now, fast forward a bunch of years, and I was like in my early 40s, and I got a really big bonus check one year. And And I was like, you know what? I've earned this. I'm going to go buy that Porsche 911. So that's exactly what I did. I went to the Park Cities Porsche in Dallas, and I bought this. This is the exact car, by the way. This is a picture of the car. Porsche 911 turbo convertible, amazing car. Drove it home, showed it to my friends and family, parked it in the garage. Literally that night, I'm laying in bed and I can't sleep. What I realized was I'm not 16 anymore. And look, it's different for everybody, but for me, this car didn't mean success to me anymore. In fact, the car felt like just one more thing to take care of. Like, I've already got 2 kids and a wife and a dog and a house. I don't need another obligation. And so I did something kind of crazy, which is I woke up the next morning and I took the car back to the dealership. And to the manager's credit, oh, thank you. To the manager's credit, he shook my hand. He's like, dude, you are the first person who's ever done this. So, yeah. So again, back to that idea of like everything society tells you is wrong. You have to be willing to stand out from the crowd. It's one of the best moves I've ever made. So minimalism, which is what I'm talking about, is widely misunderstood. So most people think when they hear minimalism, they think like, I'm going to live like a monk. I'm going to pinch every penny. I'm going to deny myself of everything, or that I have to return my Porsche. But actually, it's not that at all. Minimalism is simply about understanding what brings you true joy. And if it doesn't, remove it from your life to make room for more of what brings you true joy. So it's like sort of hedonistic in a way, because you're gorging on things that actually bring you joy. In my case, I don't care about the car I drive, right? And so by removing that from my life, it gave me the time and energy to focus on other things. And the key point here is minimalism is different from everyone. One of my best childhood friends collects freaking Porsches, and he loves it. He's a car guy. It brings him so much joy. For him, that is minimalism. For me, not having one is. So the question I'd like you guys to go home and ask of everything in your life is, does this bring me true joy? It's a powerful process. Like, look at the things and honestly, like the people and the things that you do with your time, and ask, does this bring me, it's easy to say yes to things. It's hard to say no sometimes. So when I say upgrade from first class to economy, what I'm talking about is like sometimes it is true that less is more. The car that I drive today, my kids call it the jalopy. It's a 16-year-old truck. It's got 180,000 miles on it, but I friggin' love that truck because it's got all my climbing gear in the back ready to go. I can beat the shit out of it, and it just comes back for more. And my mechanic says at best it's worth $2,000. I spend $2,000 every time it goes to the shop, which is like monthly. But I'll drive that car until the wheels fall off because it does bring me true joy. So like in this case, like something that costs 100 times less is actually better than the thing that costs 100 times more. All right, next one, number 4, compare your camera roll, not your bankroll. So you've probably heard the saying, comparison is the thief of joy. We all feel that, right? Like when we talk about comparing, what are we talking about typically? Money. Yeah, like how much money do we have? And it's hard not to compare. One thing that it's like a mental trick a little bit that I've learned is like I really shifted my focus to comparing bankroll to comparing camera roll or experiences. In my friend circle, I'm probably like the least wealthy person in my friend circle, but I will stack my camera roll up next to anyone's. And knowing this crowd, you guys have some epic camera rolls too. You were showing me some pictures last night. And so that's the healthy thing to compare if you're going to compare something. So this sticky note has been on our fridge at home for years. It says Dahlstrom's invest in experiences. And it's funny, I just put it up there because I was inspired one day, and it kind of became our family motto. Like I have 2 teenage girls, and they repeat it now. And just the power of saying something like that has really impacted our family. So a story related to experiences, my 2 girls, I made a deal with them that when each of them were teenagers, I would take them anywhere in the world they want to go, just them and I for a week. They plan the itinerary and I pay for it. And so in July, I went on a trip with my 17-year-old, and her, for some reason, she likes tiny spaces. She's obsessed with like tiny houses. So she wanted to go and take the Orient Express train in Europe. And it's like this really luxe vintage train. We took it from Amsterdam to Venice through 5 countries. Had just this epic experience. It was absurdly expensive. But I asked her after the trip, I said, Allie, what was your favorite memory from the trip? And she said, honestly, Dad, it was having coffee in St. Mark's Square, watching the sunset. And that was my favorite memory too. This is the oldest coffee shop in the world, by the way. And so we had this, it cost $30 to have coffee. We actually bought mugs from this coffee shop, and now we can kind of relive that moment at home. But the point here is like, I spent all this money on the Orient Express and her favorite memory was just having coffee, right? So experiences don't have to cost a lot of money. In fact, some of the best of them don't. So what's in your camera roll? It's something to think about. All right, number 5, be more than your work. So this is kind of an epidemic in America, especially for men. What I'm talking about here is identity. You know, and look, there's a season for everything. Like I certainly in my 20s and 30s had my head down grinding, and there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of you guys in this room, you're building right now, you're grinding. That's okay, but recognize that that is ultimately a path to nowhere, no matter how successful you are. You remember this slide? These are like my most successful friends. You know, they're all unhappy. It's different reasons, but it's all the same root cause, which is identity. And so the goal is to build what I call a multidimensional identity. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here. Like the fact that you're here in this crowd tells me you probably are at least a little bit multidimensional already, meaning that your identity isn't just based on your work. And the way I think about it is it shifts over time. Like when you're young, you got to hustle, you got to grind if you want to get ahead, you want to get financially independent, whatever. So maybe most of your identity is your work. But over time, and this is unfortunately a lesson that I learned later than I would have liked, is over time, you've got to have your identity based on other stuff, right? And so so when you get to my age, which I did make a dramatic shift by rebooting my life, you get to my age, like for me, I'm still passionate about my work, but in terms of like who I am, it's like the last thing I'll ever bring up. Like it's 20% of my identity, maybe. And so often people will ask me like, well, what is the other stuff? Like, how do you figure out what the other stuff is? And I say, have a conversation with 2 people. Talk to your 12-year-old self and your 80-year-old self, because they'll both tell you the same thing, which is like, go do cool shit. Like just do stuff you're passionate about, hang out with rad people, build your identity around that, because that'll last forever. I have a really great story for this. So I was an investor in a startup in 2015 run by a friend of mine named Scott. And the business got off to a really fast start. So within 2 years, the company was doing $10 million a year in revenue. It was hitting on all cylinders. But then all of a sudden it hit a wall. We lost some key customers, revenue went down, the company actually started losing money. And Scott, who was the CEO, right in the midst of this, he also went through a nasty divorce. Like he was in a child custody battle, it was ugly. And I talked to him and I said, you know, how you doing? He said, man, I'm in a super dark place. And actually he was having suicidal thoughts. He was getting help for that already. And so I ended up, long story short, I ended up selling my position in that company, kind of lost touch with Scott, but reconnected with him a year later. And I said, hey man, how you doing? He said, actually, life's better than ever. He, on a whim, when he was at his darkest point, he remembered that he used to race BMX when he was a teenager. And he really loved it. So he literally Googled adult BMX leagues. And who knew, right? There's adult BMX leagues in every major city in the country. So he went out and bought, like 43-year-old Scott, went out and bought a BMX bike, joined this BMX league, and he said, Kevin, I'm not exaggerating when I say it saved my life. Like I lost 30 pounds, I got in shape, I found this amazing community. I'm dating a girl from the BMX club now, so it totally transformed his life. That's how powerful it is, and that's also my story. So I didn't tell what I didn't mention when I talked about my big meeting with Masa was I'd already had a virus growing within me. So 25 years ago, I stumbled into a climbing gym in Dallas, Texas, and was immediately hooked. And you know, climbing is like surfing and a bunch of other sports where it's like, it's not really so much a sport as it is a lifestyle. It's a way of life. It's a community. It's the places it takes you. And so it grew on me. What I loved about it was the opposite of the business world, where your worth had nothing. No one cares how much money you make, what your title is. They actually don't even care if you're a good climber. They care, are you cool? Like, are you fun to hang out with? And so that had a huge impact on my reboot that I eventually did. And now I would say, like, if my identity is like, I think of myself as a climber. I climb full time now. That's like my identity. So huge impact in my life. All right, number 6, and I'm going to have to probably speed up here, but don't be a goldfish. So I don't know about you, but like when I go to someone's house and they have like a goldfish bowl and there's a goldfish, I always feel sorry for the goldfish. I mean, I know goldfish aren't that smart, but it seems like a really uninspiring place to live your whole life. Like maybe there's a plastic tree in the bowl or something. And what I'm speaking to here is the importance of place and what I call being in your happy place. And so I'm gonna lay a hot take on you. One of my hot takes is your choice of place is as important as your choice of partner. So all of us put like immense effort into picking our partner, right? We date 50 different people. We put a lot of thought into it. We're super deliberate. Like, is this the right person for me? But so many people like live where they live just because that's where they live. I mean, I grew up in a small town in South Texas, and like a lot of my friends just stayed there their whole life. And they're like the goldfish to me. Like, they never got out. I was like, if I could live anywhere, where would I live? And I did a bunch of analysis, and for me, it was and is Boulder. And look, I want a disclaimer. I want to say that this isn't something that happens overnight. Like, you know, it's a privilege to be able to live in your happy place. And it may be something that you have to earn over years or decades like I did, but have a plan, right? Don't just live in the goldfish bowl all your life. You know, for me, Boulder is like, I call the Flatirons, which this is a picture of the Flatirons taken by a friend of mine who's a paraglider. This is where I do my climbing. It's like my church. It's my excuse for not going to church with my wife. It's a spiritual experience, right? So, and I actually live right up in the upper right corner. I look out my office window at the Flatirons, and I will tell you that for me, better late than never. I didn't move to Boulder until 2018 when I was 47, but it completely transformed my life. Because literally, you're immersed in the place you live 24/7. It's the one thing you do that impacts literally everything you do. So just planting the seed for you. All right, number 7, think like a time billionaire. Has anybody ever heard the concept of a time billionaire? Yes. All right, good, at least one person. So it's a cool concept where, and it's really simple. So a billion seconds is 30 years. So if you're, let's just say everybody in this room, including me, barely, is a time billionaire, meaning we have at least a billion seconds left in our life. And the point is that time is actually way more valuable than money. And you know, sometimes when I say that, people will roll their eyes like, whatever, dude. Like, I would much rather have $1 billion than a billion seconds. And I say, not so fast. So here's a test for that. You know, Warren Buffett is worth $135 billion, but he's 93 years old. Would you trade places with him? So you just proved my point. Like, time is more valuable than money. I guarantee you Warren Buffett would give back every penny he has to have 1 billion seconds left. And so the real question, and in fact, really one of the only questions that matters in life is how are you going to invest your billion seconds? You know, invest it well. Act like a capital allocator. Like, be very strategic about your billion seconds because it's precious. I'll talk in a second about a framework for how to think about investing your time. But for now, I'll just leave you with that question. All right, number 8, get fit. This one speaks for itself, and I am preaching to the crowd here. I saw some ripped bodies out by the pool. But, you know, fitness is foundational for everything. Being healthy, it makes everything better. You'll perform better at work. You'll have better sex. Everything's better. And you remember this chart from earlier where I said, you know, over time, work needs to be less of your identity and other stuff needs to be more. I'm here to tell you, like, health needs to become an increasing part of that other stuff. I call it tightening the screws. Like, the older you get, you need to make room to spend more time on health and fitness. I'm not talking about just exercise. Like, it's diet, it's your lifestyle, it's everything. And I often say, like, you know, a lot of people think, you know, fitness is like going to the gym 3 times a week. No, especially as you get older, like, it needs to be a huge commitment, especially if you want to perform at a high level for a long time. And I often say, you know, on their 50th birthday, some people turn 70 and some turn 30. Have you guys seen this meme? So that's Paul Rudd and Wilford Brimley. Believe it or not, in this picture, they're the same age. They're both 52. So do you want to be Paul Rudd or do you want to be Wilford Brimley? And the reason I ask is you're making that decision today. You don't wait till you're 50. You make that decision with all the actions today. All right. Give yourself a break. So this is another lesson I learned. I wish I would have known when I was like in my 20s. A friend of mine, Paul Miller, just published his 2nd book. It's called Good Work. You have to read this book. It's freaking great. So write it down. But it's basically about he calls good work, work that nourishes your soul. And the book is all about how to get there. But one of the things he's a big proponent of is sabbaticals. And I'm just going to read a quote from the book. The transformative power of sabbaticals remains underrated. Many people still feel tremendous guilt about taking a break from work. Does that sound familiar? It's normal to save for years for a dream home or for university education for your kids, but when people think about saving or planning for a sabbatical in the same way, they dismiss the possibility. This is a uniquely American thing because I've traveled the world for climbing, and like Europeans in particular think about this very, very differently. Like a 3-month break is like a normal summer for them, you know? And Americans were on this like crazy 2 weeks of vacation a year, or sometimes like if you're an entrepreneur, it's 0 weeks of vacation a year. And so the way to think about it is you're probably going to work about 500 months in your life. Most of us do. A 3-month break is less than 1% of that. It seems like a pretty small sacrifice to do something that could be completely transformative. And as Paul's quote said, it's something that can be planned for. Like anybody could plan for a 3-month break. One of my friends who's a tech worker in Silicon Valley, Samantha, just did like her first sabbatical ever. And she texted me, and I pulled an excerpt from the text. It's like, I saw that I was living in a delusion where the trivial was disguised as important. That hit me hard because you can imagine how creating space for yourself gives you real perspective on what's important. Like when you're in the thick of it, things seem important that actually aren't important at all. There's another great quote is, "This is awesome." That one's from me. I just really started, like I guess what you would call a sabbatical about a month ago. I intentionally wrapped up all of my work projects. This is the only thing on my calendar, this event. So I have nothing on my calendar. And I will tell you, I'm as hard charging as they come. Like I've never taken an extended break. And I'm like 2 months into it, and already it's been transformational. Like I'm looking at the other end of like, we're going to be empty nesters in a year. And so there's another reboot probably coming our way. So it's really providing the space. And also like I'm able to pursue creative projects like this, like, helping tell the story. All right, last one, and then we're done. Last one is the time is now. This is a powerful one because all of us have like a list in our head of like things we want to do someday. It's someday, someday, someday. The problem is, what I've observed is someday often never comes. And so I've got a kind of a sad story about this. So when I was a kid, I used to go visit my uncle and aunt who lived on the Texas coast. And they were of low means. I mean, my uncle ran a gas station, literally pumped the gas himself. And every day he would come home from the gas station and put the change that he got from customers. This was back in the days when people actually used, real physical money. He'd put them in these 5-gallon jugs. And as a kid, like I was 10 years old, these jugs just seemed like an infinite amount of money. It blew my mind. He always said that those jugs were their savings to be able to take the family to Hawaii. They had never been outside the state of Texas. They were, lived a very simple life. Well, unfortunately, years later, when my uncle was like late 40s, he found out he had stage 4 bone cancer and died like 3 weeks later. I went to his funeral. And I saw the jugs in his room, and they never went to Hawaii. Someday never came for my uncle. So I guess the message here is, sorry about that. The message here is like, don't wait for someday. Like whatever's on your list, make it happen now. All right, let's bring it back up. So I talked about, so how do you make sure that someday does come? There's a really simple concept that I like called time buckets. And it's like, it could not be simpler, but it's kind of powerful. You literally just break your life up into decades and like list out all the things that are on your someday list. You put like which decades are going to happen in, commit to it. And like some of these are obvious. Like if you're going to have kids, you're probably going to do it in your 20s, 30s, maybe 40s. You're probably not going to do it in your 60s. Some people do, some men do, but I wasn't pointing at you for any particular. Yeah, absolutely. And then there's also some things that you have to do later in life because maybe it requires, if you want to be a full-time rock climber, you have to have financial independence to do that because rock climbing doesn't pay very well. And so really simple but powerful. So if you think about your billion seconds, divide your billion seconds into things you want to accomplish, kind of by decade. That's a really powerful trick. All right, let's land this plane. So I'll come back to this quote, which really sums up this whole presentation, which is, everyone has great days, and you should continue to chase great days. Like today's a great day. But those aren't the stuff that great lives are made of. Great lives are made from other stuff. And for me, like I got to do a lot of cool stuff that I didn't even talk about in my career. Like I got to ring the bell on Wall Street. That's a pretty cool thing. But you know what? At the end of the day, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. What means a lot is the life I lead every day in Boulder with my family, being outdoors, getting sunshine, climbing, whatever. That's the stuff that a great life is made from. So I'll end with the question we started with, which is, What are you doing to be the exception? If you really do believe, and I can tell you this is the truth, that the vast majority of people with huge financial success have crappy lives. A lot of them are just flat out miserable. So if you're going to have career success and a happy life, you better be going against the grain and doing things to make you the exception. So hopefully one thing I said today will impact your life and cause you to make a decision or a change in your life to get on the right track. And that's it. Thank you. And one last thing. So I do love hearing from people. And so if something resonated with you today, or if you make a change, please email me. Like, take a picture of my email address. Also follow me on Twitter. The whole reason I'm here, by the way, is because of Twitter. I was on a flight one time, a year or two ago, and Kyle recognized me from Twitter. He followed me on Twitter. We didn't know each other, and he introduced me to Hollis. Hollis and I became friends.
You on the plane, he texted me. I was like, you know this guy? And I was like, I don't know who he is. And he sent me his Twitter, and I was like, be like fanboy.
Yeah, so Hollis and I, we became, like, I always joke that with Kyle and Hollis, we like book an hour for lunch in Boulder, and then 4 hours later, we're like still wrapping up. So that's why I'm here. So, all right, thank you guys. Any questions?
You talked about the epiphany moment where you left. Was there signs in the lead up to that in the months and years prior?
Oh, yeah. The signs are always there. We choose to ignore them. I was telling you last night, like, I thought I was winning. Like, I came out of kind of a rough family background. So my mode was like, this is what success is. I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to go. I thought for a long time, I thought I was winning, even though inside I knew like I wasn't super happy. It felt like winning. And so for me, I'm a slow learner, I guess. It kind of did have to happen all at once because I was denying all those feelings because I thought on paper I was winning. And so how do you reconcile these things? And look, this was before, there weren't people talking about this stuff back then. Twitter didn't exist. Like lifestyle, like I always say, like, I started my career in management consulting. And if I'd gone into my boss's office, like the partner, and said, hey, you know, I was just thinking, I want a little bit better work-life balance. He would say, get the fuck out of my office. Like, that wasn't even a thing. And so I think culture plays into it a lot. Yeah.
Did they take the Porsche back?
They did, yeah. Actually, it turns out Texas, some of you may know better than me, Texas has like this 48-hour return law. So he had to take it back. I didn't know it at the time, but he had to take it back. Yeah. Other questions?
What's the model of the truck? Because you didn't say, you just called it the Gelatos.
Yeah. Well, it's a 2008 Land Rover LR3, which, you know, Land Rovers are nice, but if you see this thing, you know, yeah. I mean, they're notorious for needing repairs, and it's, you know, yeah, I'm about $10,000 behind on repairs, but I do love that car.
Does she have a name?
She doesn't, and which is funny because my wife and, you know, I'm the only guy in the household that they all have names for their cars, but Laverne or whatever, yeah. Other questions? Anything personal, professional? The more provocative, the better. All right. Oh, yeah.
You said like the formulation around the 2.0, you know, are you including assets that you own? Or are you talking about liquidity? Like, are you talking about stock market? Or are you talking about your
total net worth?
Total net worth.
Yeah, anything that you own that would be an asset. Ideally, you don't have a lot of assets that depreciate in value like cars, but it could be your home. It could be any assets that you have. And if you email me, I wrote a longer write-up on the 4% rule that actually even includes like a Google Sheet calculator for it. Yeah. Yeah, just email me. There's my email address. Or DM me on Twitter. All right, great. Any other questions? Thank you, guys.